Welcome back to the Intentional Intern Podcast. This week's guest is Brandon K. Hedgepeth, a recent graduate from Old Dominion University. He recently graduated with his master's degree in lifespan and digital communication. His love for media and communication transcends his academics. He has also had 2 podcasts. His previous show, Brands Tech, is a podcast structured in having topic-based discussions with guests surrounding technology and how it interacts with everyday life, as well as how the world works. His current show, Tansen Talks, is a podcast on a mission to bring people together. Every Saturday, check out Tansen Talks' new episodes where you can meet new guests and learn about their passions and inspirations. Brandon and I talk about all things comms, from the power of communication and what it means to him, embracing the language of embodied communication, and what it's like to be podcasters. For those who want to connect with Brandon, his LinkedIn will be linked below. You can also check out Brandon's podcast below with the links in the show notes. With that, let's get into it. Hi, Brandon. How are you?
I'm doing well. How about yourself?
I'm doing really, really good. I'm glad that you asked, and I'm super happy to have you on the podcast today.
Yeah, and I'm super honored to be on your show.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I would love for you to kick us off by just introducing yourself and telling us a little bit more about you and what you're up to.
Yeah, of course. So I am Brandon K. Hedgepeth, and I am a recently completed graduate student. I just finished my Master's of Arts degree in lifespan and digital communication. I'm also a podcaster of several years, among other things, but most importantly, I'm so delighted to be here.
Awesome. That was such a brief intro. I like that.
Thank you.
Yeah. And let's get into that. So let's start with just you graduating. First, congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit more about your degree and what you graduated with?
Yes, of course. So as I mentioned, I just finished on May 3rd, 2024 with my master's degree in lifespan and digital communication. The usual response I get when I tell that to people is, good for you. I have no idea what that means. That must mean that you're just so smart. And it's like, okay, hold on. Well, let me give these simplistic terminology as to what that means. So basically, our master's program is quite unique in that it blends relational interpersonal communication with digital media studies, but it takes a lifespan approach and focuses on the digital, meaning that basically the intersection of how we communicate within the 21st century, especially in relation to present day, online-based media.
That seems like such an interesting degree, to be honest.
Yeah, it definitely really appealed to me. I attended the same university for my bachelor's degree too, and so I just continued right into the program, taking master's degree classes at the undergraduate level, and then doing practically seamless transition over. And so, but I absolutely loved it. I got my bachelor's degree in media studies.
Oh, wow. Okay, so what is your career aspiration and what's your end goal? That's more, I can see it's more communications heavy, but what do you think is something you want to do?
So the interesting thing about that is I just have so many interests that, if I had to pick just one, that's honestly a pretty big struggle because I have always been someone that loves doing a little bit of anything and everything. But, I would honestly say that where I am right now is honestly where I want to be. So I'm pretty open to potential opportunities because for me, I just love meeting people and connecting with others. And as I always say, I'm on a mission to bring people together. And so whatever sort of job that allows me to do that, I think I would be very open to exploring those possibilities. But right now, I also do video production stuff. So the current goal right now is just to continue with my own podcast and also with video production and just see where the wind takes me.
And let's talk a little bit about that video production. So what do you do with that? What makes you interested in doing that?
So the interesting thing about how I got into that is actually because back in 2016, back when I was finishing out middle school, there was a class assignment that was saying, let's make a company for the sake of this project. And I've always been very passionate about my education. And so the thought of just doing a project and just end it there, it didn't feel like me. so I had opted to try to make my fictional company into reality, and so I made a YouTube channel based off of that, off of the concept that I made for that class project. And fast forward about 4 years later, is that I had found out about this video production class that I could take, back in high school, and I was like, okay, well, maybe I'll do this for the sake of just expanding my, my YouTube. And I really had no expectations like going into it. I just wanted to learn more. And so going into it, it just really allowed for me to expand my horizons and see more, more that I could do beyond what I've ever, thought of. And so over the time between 2018 and now, I've been a camera operator, audio technician, live stream coordinator, intern, among many other things. I would say that I'm pretty well versed in anything related to the organization that I do video production for, and I absolutely love it, and especially the community that we have within our organization.
I love that. I feel like that definitely ties a little bit more into like the communication based things that you do, but like in an intuitive way of just, hey, we're kind of communicating visually now. So how am I taking this and creating the best angles, or, providing the best value through what I do in production and how I'm communicating that? I think that's super, super cool in a great way. That it's kind of fun and keeps you on your toes for sure, just like communications in media does.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I would say that it just ties in so well, with some of my other interests, even those outside of just the traditional communication route, that there's so much stuff I've learned throughout my life that I've been able to apply to things that are completely unrelated. And so, yeah, I definitely am just so excited I had that opportunity. It wasn't one I had sought out. It just sort of quite literally showed up to my mailbox in a little flyer. And as soon as I saw that, I was like, you know what? Let me give it a shot. And here I am, now still working there and absolutely loving it just as much as I did on day one.
And I know you spoke on that you have a podcast earlier. So let's transition a little bit from the video side to the audio side. I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about your podcast. What's going on with that?
Oh, yeah. So, yeah, I absolutely love podcasting. And I've definitely have done it in numerous different iterations throughout the years. But my current show, titled Tansen Talks, has been going on since February of 2023. And as of right now, I've recorded 80 episodes. I release once a week. And I would say that, one of my favorite parts of podcasting has truly been the amazing people I've had a chance to meet and the community that I've worked to, I wouldn't say help build, but instead helped understand better. Because I really feel like the internet is just one big community. It's just a matter of connecting the dots. And so for me, I love being able to, to meet others and help being able to tell their stories just a little bit. And so it's been really fun being able to do that overall between my numerous different shows that I've done podcasting wise. I've now spoken with, I believe, 143 guests. So that's been a fun journey. And so a little bit of background into my current podcast. So my current one is a video podcast. And so before that, I had done primarily audio podcasts. I'd done actually 250 episodes prior to my current show. And so I think one of the reasons as to why I restarted is that I kind of wanted a new beginning, and I wanted a chance to, to learn from my previous experiences and really use it to really build a better base and better connect with people. I originally started off doing podcasting actually for technology purposes. I loved, technology. I considered myself a technology enthusiast back then. And so I just wanted to speak with others about technology, and it really evolved from there, where instead of learning about the technology, I wanted to learn how you use technology in your everyday life. And so it was more about the person than the technology, but I wanted to be able to expand beyond just the STEM route. And so being able to expand like to communication and to whatever interest the guests have, that's sort of what I wanted to do. And I think my new show really encompasses that well.
That's amazing. And wow, 250 episodes of a prior podcast, and now on this podcast speaking with 143 guests, over 80 episodes. I mean, wow.
Thank you.
That's rather impressive, and I'm so happy that from podcaster to podcaster, it's really nice to see other people and other people's perspectives of why they get into podcasting and how they're always with the common universal base of still finding some sort of community. And that's where we all kind of split off and differ from what type of community we're trying to curate. But it sounds like that you have a great base so far with your podcast, whether it's this one or your previous one that you are able to learn from.
Thank you so much, and I greatly appreciate that. I think it's just so wonderful being able to just even look back and see all the people I've had a chance to meet, many of them that I call, friends today, and just being able to just truly see, like, how far I've been able to come, especially considering, like, back in elementary school, I was a person that I really only spoke if spoken to, and I'm still rather introverted now, as I'm sure you can tell a little bit, but I think the power of communicating just goes beyond that just a little bit.
No, I do believe that. And I think that even goes for verbal communication, but also nonverbal communication as well. When you can just see someone and they give you a little look or a little smile or a little just piece of understanding. I think that
Yes.
also makes you love to be around people and open up a little bit more within yourself if you are naturally reserved in that way.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I think even in my studies, even though I focus more on the media studies side, even in my master's program, that I tried to learn a little bit of anything and everything. And learning about embodied communication, I thought was just so fascinating, especially, translating that into a digital setting.
Yeah, I would love if you want to expand on that topic a little bit more and talk about what that seems like. I think the term of embodied communication already sounds super interesting to me, so I'd love to learn more about that.
Yeah. And so the way that I understand embodied communication, which of course everyone has their own sort of definitions, of how you would define certain topics, but the way that I best understand it is sort of taking the concept of nonverbal communication, but even the term nonverbal communication, it emphasizes that it's not verbal, and it sort of, in some opinions, devalues the type of communication it is because it just emphasizes, oh, it's not verbal. But whereas with embodied, it sort of shows that it's a part of you that you can't really take that sort of communication away. And so everything from like body language, I mean, to even how you present yourself, like everything sort of matters and makes a difference in how you communicate with others. And taking that even to a electronic sense, like people use emojis, for instance, to show how they may feel and react. But I personally like going above and beyond and like to sometimes challenge that too. Is that like if I send a happy face emoji, am I actually happy? Or am I happy about what you said? Or am I actually sad? And I'm using that as a way to not worry you. And so for me, I kind of like being able to dive into a little bit as to the true power of electronic communication. But then even outside of that, just traditional, embodied communication of, like we were saying earlier, like body language, just like giving someone a smile, how that can help someone, brighten their day just a little bit. Or even the communication, of just holding the door open for someone else. You may not think that as communication, but I'm delivering a message to you. And that's the part of the power of communication.
No, literally, the power of communication is so important. And I want to ask you from your standpoint, I know you talked a little bit about like your history with that in elementary school of being the kid that was, spoken to if they were spoken to first. Has there been any other like monumental moments in your life where the power of communication has really affected you to be who you are today?
Well, I feel like, I mean, there's so many moments that I think that the power of communication really has affected my life. And I did want to clarify a little bit for, my time in elementary school and even somewhat to the present day is that I would say that I've always, at least tried to anyway, have a really good, relationship with each of my teachers and educators that I've gone through. Just my peers might be another story. I definitely was a little bit more reserved to my peers than I were to the amazing educators I've had throughout my life. But I would say that there certainly are just times in my life that I feel like just someone, speaking to me or someone just even communicating to me, I think has affected me so greatly. And actually, I'm going to say the time of starting my podcast to now, I think has greatly impacted me and the communication I've heard from my guests. Just because there's so many times where someone says something that just truly resonates with me, And, you know, on one hand, almost affects who I am as a person. And I would go off to say that all 143 people I've spoken with, and even those I've spoken with as coworkers, as family members, as friends, that everyone's had a different impact on me. And so I think who I am today is a 100% complete direct result as to each of those people. Like if one person says, like they might say in their life that they took a break, for instance, from the space to focus on themselves. Well, I might look a few months later and say, you know what, I'm trying to figure out my life right now, but you know what, that one person said, take a break, and why don't I do that? And so there's just so many instances that it'd be like, you know, too much to try to count like any single one of them. And I will say too that I am very much a very genuine, you know, person. At least I try my best to be whenever communicating. And so I know oftentimes like people will cite certain people as to, yeah, I mean, you know, who told them to do this or who inspired them to do this. And that for me, I would want to thank every single individual person. And I'd be really afraid to leave someone out, which is oftentimes why I, you know, go towards more the general route and referencing people, just because I truly would want to make sure that every single person individually gets recognized for just their amazing work and believing in me and inspiring me to where I am today.
Spoken like a true communicator.
Thank you.
Of course. And I would love to talk a little bit more on the podcasting just side of things and aspect. Of course, with us both being podcasters and having our own podcast, I'm very curious to learn about your podcast process. So when you're thinking about new episodes or thinking about new topics, what does that look like for you? What is your creative framework is what I like to call it. So what is when you're thinking of, okay, this is something that I'm looking to do. How do you go through that process with yourself?
That's such a fascinating question. And I mean, I think it's just so insightful. So as a little bit of background into how I got to my current show. So I mentioned that I had a previous podcast, you know, before my current one. And I technically actually had two, sort of, and they were actually concurrent podcasts. And so I had one that was more on the technology side. The other, I wanted a more personal podcast to speak about some of my own journey outside of just interviews. But the more I did that second one, the more that it sort of evolved into a more storytelling podcast. And so I ultimately had decided to merge those two into my current show. But all that to say, though, is that for me, I oftentimes for my current show try to figure out, okay, like who do I want on my podcast? And so I actually tried to reach out to a lot of people I actually personally know. And the reason for that is that as much as I would love to speak with anyone and everyone, you know, and of course with my show, I try to encourage my viewers to go after their goals and to meet those around you. Is for me, I don't know how I could say meet those around you if I don't speak with those, you know, people on my show. And so for me, I love having my friends on because I get to sort of help show the world like why I think these are just such amazing people, and being able to speak with some of the people that, you know, that they know, and being able to go from there. And so oftentimes, you know, for instance, if I just went to a conference, like a lot of times I'll meet numerous people, and so I might mention my podcast in passing or whatever, and you know, their response might be like, "Oh, well, that's so cool," or "Yeah, I've always wanted to do it." It's like, "Oh, well, do you want to be on?" And they're like, "Oh my gosh, me? You know, really?" It's like, "But I haven't done anything," you know. But I think that just makes it just all the more worthwhile because, yeah, at the end of the day, yeah, a podcast is just another form of communication, and to me, that's something I really want to do and focus on. And so that's ultimately how I started off, and just from there, I've had so many of my other guests who have seen my previous episodes. And we're just like, I'm just such a big fan, you know, and I love supporting you. It's like, oh, well, would you be interested in being on? It's like, really? And so I think it just sort of has progressed from there. In terms of what we discuss, I'm very much a storyteller. And so for me, I like figuring out, like, how'd you get to where we are now? And so I think that's really is just a major part of my show and of my mission, you know, to bring people together. And so over the years, it's definitely has evolved. Like I know 2022, I spoke with a lot of people who are in the STEM fields, everything from aerospace engineering to, computer engineering, computer science, to 2023 and the beginning part of this year, a lot of public relations people and whatnot. And who knows what the next, big group will be. But I think it's also reflected a bit as to who I am and my evolving interest. And for me, always wanting to learn, a little bit, not just about academics, but from others and from each other, because I feel like there's so much that we can learn from.
I can't think of a better way to say how you said it. And I don't know why I've never thought about this before. Of podcasting is just another form of communication. And I guess for me, when I think about podcasting, I think about podcasting in terms of like it's another form of connection.
Yes.
But that connection also embodies communication. And so looking at it from that perspective, it clicked for me. So I appreciate you providing that further context, just because I look at connection by having a conversation and inherently think about communication.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will say too that I think one of the reasons too, as to, like I mentioned, I'm meeting people like at conferences, for instance, is that I think that's just such a great way to also stay in communication with others. We have all these different avenues of digital communication now, from instant messaging, text messaging, email, and all this other stuff. But I think with doing a podcast with someone, I think it allows for you to understand that person better and to understand not just who they are, but what they do and why do they do that. And I think it allows for you to get to know someone at a deeper level, but also in a rather short period of time. Or as I joke, it's like we can go from strangers to like best friends in the matter of about half an hour, just because, I've truly liked the depth of some of these conversations. And not every conversation is the same. One conversation might be easy flowing where, as a host, you barely have to say a thing, that the guest can carry the whole conversation. Whereas others, it might be more 50-50. But for others, like, it requires you to take a different route. Maybe it's a slower conversation that's, more intimate and involved. But I've enjoyed every single conversation, each for their own reason. And I always believe, in my opinion, the best conversations, especially even with the podcast guest, are the ones not recorded. It might be the discussion immediately before and after, or the context for, right before the conversation. Maybe we had just such a great laugh right beforehand. And so right when we hit record, we were able to capture that energy. And so looking back at so many of these episodes, we can see where we are then, our thoughts at the time, and how they've evolved over the years.
No, literally. And I completely agree with your sentiment of sometimes when people ask me how long do the podcast episodes last, or how, like, is there a certain time frame that they're about to hit? And I'm just like, no, it's just how we go about the conversation, and how many minutes we're at is what we're at, because I want something that is still genuine and organic, and I don't ever want anybody to feel like, or for myself to feel like even, that I have to fill a necessary time slot. Like there's some type of constraint there, and I want it to be as free-flowing as possible, but also just open with the energy as possible. And so I completely understand from that sentiment. I clearly remember, I can think of the person right now actually, of when you talked about there's probably some people that talk a lot and then some people that like don't talk as much. I remember my first guest who literally, she led the conversation. And I told her, I said, you have made this so easy for me, because any of the questions that were in my head, it was almost like you were a psychic, because you are already answering them. And it's so interesting to also see people's personality types come in that way too, of just how much you learn from others and even how they operate when it comes to communication. And so, and adapting to that on the fly is probably one of the most interesting parts of podcasting, when you're understanding people's communication styles and then understanding and almost predicting, okay, I see how this is going to go. Or I know that I just need to adjust like this in that moment, which makes the communication way more dynamic and, to me, super enjoyable.
Absolutely. Yeah, I completely agree. And I know, like, there are some times where, I go into a conversation and it ends up being completely different than like any of us would have thought or planned. And, oftentimes for the better. And it's, I don't know, it's enough where in some cases it even makes you rethink like previous communication with them, because like, oh, now that I know this, maybe this is the reason why that we had so-and-so communication or that we had this conversation. And so, especially considering I love, having people on the podcast that maybe I may have just met once or twice, but it's like, oh, it's like, this is their interest. It's like, okay, now that makes sense. Like, it's like, okay, it's like, and you kind of get to see someone in another light and get to, learn it better. And so it's just been such a fascinating process. And I'm so glad that you've had similar experiences with that.
No, I definitely have. I think it's something that I just really love of being able to have conversations, especially in a podcast setting, because you know that you're going to come out way more connected than you were before. And I think podcasting specifically, or any type of form of media, even with interviewing and things like that, you're getting something from others, and you're getting something particularly that you wouldn't get within like a normal organic one-on-one kind of conversation, because they're prepped to have some sort of, okay, I'm talking about this, or I'm talking about this. Or in my case with my podcast, it's, we're just sharing your story, and we're wanting to just talk about what your passions are and how those can be reflected within a unique media form that you can present. And so then with that background for me of, this is how they would like for themselves to be presented in the outside world, or this is how they would like themselves to be presented to those that are getting to know them. It's like a literal answer to tell me about yourself. But instead of having 5 minutes, you have like 50 with them, and getting to really understand from that standpoint of what that's like. And I think it's just so interesting seeing, even again, like the differences in people and individuals, and how they operate, how they prep as best as they can, how they adapt to, things like that. And so I think that's one of the great parts about being a podcaster. I don't think there's really any like bad part about being a podcaster, maybe editing in the beginning when you're trying to figure that out. But I think being a podcaster and having the interest that we have, and what's the best way to say this, but just having the role that we have within the podcast as being the host and being the person that's getting to facilitate this conversation as well as be a part of it, is something that's super, super interesting and something very enjoyable, again, in that dynamic conversational setting.
Yes, I definitely, couldn't agree more, especially with the editing at the beginning.
Oh my gosh, editing is to me, it will never be fun. I like listening to the conversation, but editing itself will never be fun to me.
Yeah, I completely get that. I remember when I started, I guess consistently podcasting again, and trying to get into audio editing. So obviously doing video production, I was very familiar with video editing, but switching over to audio editing, I think, was so annoying at first. And so I started getting into the groove of it, over the weeks and months. But yeah, I don't think I will ever per se say it's really fun editing and real swell. But I mean, I'm at least adapted to it. But I will say, going into video podcasts and switching from video editing to audio editing, then back to video editing again, it was it's like, how did I used to do this back then? I used to be really good at this. And so relearning the process all over again. But I mean, isn't that what we do always as podcasters?
Always. You're always having to adapt to new seasons of life, new seasons of change. And I can definitely speak from my own experience of, oh yeah, I'm going to do episodes this many times. And then I'm like, depending on how many people I have, I might do this many times. I'm going to design this. Oh, I want to rebrand this. Oh, I want to XYZ. Oh, I'm actually learning my capabilities of what I can do and what I can't do. And then you have to readjust over and over depending on what you have going on in your life, especially for us as emerging professionals as well. So it's a little bit different all the time when you're trying to understand that.
Absolutely.
Hey everyone, it's Amaya, your host of the Intentional Intern Podcast. I wanted to take a moment to share something special with you about our blog. For those of you who don't know, the Intentional Insights blog is our bi-weekly blog designed to offer free-flowing, open discussions about college life, career growth, lessons learned, and all the real moments in between. Our second edition of the Intentional Insights is now live, titled Your Voice, Your Journey, Why Your Story Matters. In this edition, I write about why embracing your voice is the key to building your own authentic journey. Your story matters, and I center it around why your story should matter to you first before thinking about why it matters to everyone else or how it could matter to everyone else. Whether you're early in your career or simply figuring out your next steps, this post is an inspiring reminder that your voice deserves to be heard and your journey is yours to shape. If you're ready for a reflective and empowering read, head over to intentionalinternpodcast.com and check out the latest edition. From your experience, I want to ask this on the more like podcasty but personal side and personal opinion. What has been one of, because I know there's so many, there's not just one for us, what has been one of your favorite episodes that you have recorded?
Ooh, okay. So first of all, in terms of favorite, I always tell everyone, it's like I don't have favorites, but there's certain ones that certainly stand out to me, a little bit more than others in certain situations, and it definitely can change every time at the time of speaking about them. But I will say that for my current show, that the second episode I recorded for my current show, my guest just blew me away. The episode is titled Mindset's Key. As episode 2, it came out in February 2023. But I mean, everything about that episode just like blew me away because it was just, I don't know, it was just really genuine. And I thought that the conversation, I mean, it was just so powerful from what the guest was saying. Like they were speaking about their personal journey, and for them, they are a music maker. And so they're speaking about like their passion, about how they got into it, how they've done it throughout their life. And then even for them going further with some of their, the personal stuff that they've gone through leading up to that. And so I just thought it was just such a powerful conversation. And for the longest time, for about a year and a half-ish after it going out, that was actually the most popular video episode I'd done of my current show. And so I think that really just stands out as one of them. But another one is from a few months earlier at the end of my previous show. I had this one episode that it's hurting me that I don't remember the name of it because it usually comes to the top. But anyway, but for that one episode though, that the guest was speaking, about their personal ambitions towards being a more creative person. They used to be a very precise person, but then one day they let their creativity free, and it really reshaped who they are as a person. And so I ended up actually speechless after that episode. And actually during that episode too, where I think my only response to something they said was just, wow. Like there were no fitting words to say after that. They were being, just so genuine. And I thought it was like philosophical because it was just such an amazing conversation. And so, I mean, to hear what they were, like I said, what they were saying, it was just so phenomenal. And then a year later, they asked to be on again. And so it was just so extraordinary being able to, for instance, have those two conversations. Yeah, but the first one, I just remembered, the title is Driving Motivation. And that was for my previous podcast, Brands Tech.
Awesome. Well, I'm glad that you have multiple favorites. Like we said, there you have some, and you don't have one that's just, it's all the way up there, because again, almost if we could talk about all the episodes, they would all be favorites. But definitely, yes. It's so interesting to hear why they're your favorites, because podcasters, it's not like, this one got the most ratings, or this one got blah, blah, blah. For us, it's like, this person, like, I learned something so valuable, or I couldn't even speak after it because that episode was so interesting. Like, I think that's something super, super cool just to hear from another perspective. And I've actually got your podcast out right in front of me, so that way I can save these episodes myself.
Yeah, I definitely will say that, let me know how, what you think of some of those episodes afterwards. I said, because I just absolutely love, what I do. And I think that for some of these episodes, it's just so phenomenal to hear like what what some of these guests are up to, and truly, the mindset that they were in at the time of recording it. And I think it's just so amazing when afterwards you see the work that they're doing. and you can't help but just to cheer them on and be like, it's like you were saying that this was your dream job, and I can see on LinkedIn that you just got it. Like that is amazing, and yeah, I mean, truly, I think that's all I use LinkedIn for now is just congratulating my friends and podcast guests, just because there's just so many of them. They're all doing just such outstanding things.
No, totally. I had one of those moments the other day where one of my like recent, or not so recent anymore, but she recently got an internship at Google. And so
Wow.
she was exactly flown across the country. And I was like, oh my gosh, you were my second podcast guest ever. And it's like getting to see you now and being able to almost relishing that with you of, oh my gosh, congratulations, and really understanding your mindset and where you came from. And she was talking about, I want to be a part of the blinks of the world and I want to work for XYZ. And I remember Google being one of those companies. And I'm like, just seeing the manifestation, that is also something that's super inciting. Like for me, that's something that I really, really like. I'm a big person on that about doing something manifestation wise and being able to have that sense of just spirit of, I know I'm going to get this. I have this drive for that. And so seeing that from her and having like an audible manifestation of that and seeing that happen for her visually is something super insightful and creative that I love. So it's super interesting when you talked about LinkedIn, and I only really use it for like congratulating them and keeping up with them and stuff. I definitely feel some of the same sentiment for a lot of what I'm doing right now because, like, wow, seeing a year difference in how much it's made for some people and seeing even how much we've grown as podcasters ourselves and how we communicated with our first guest to now and down to everything that's changed. I think it's a very valuable experience overall.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can honestly say I personally love archives, just archives in general and archives of everything. And so about a year or two ago, before starting my current show, I'd wanted to save copies of all of my interviews because, as much as, platforms like Spotify, Apple, Google, YouTube, as much as they are popular now, nothing lasts forever. And the thing I would absolutely hate is that if any of these platforms went away and so did any of these amazing interviews. And so I was trying to go back, through my computer and, and make sure that and go back through the previous episodes, maybe edit some of them for clarity. And the funny thing about it is some of the episodes I remember just loving is going back through. It's like, wow, I love the interview. I hate my editing from some of the early episodes. It's like, and I thought these were some of the best ones. So it's so funny to see how you learn and grow as a person. And it's just like, and as a podcaster and editor, it's like, wow, I clearly had a lot to learn back then. But, we're still learning, we're still growing, and that's what makes us human.
Couldn't agree more. There are definitely some times where like, wow, I could have done that better.
Yeah.
And you just have to sit with it. And I think there's even something in that of going back to something that you had done prior and, recognizing, wow, this is my best work. I don't think those moments ever stop of feeling like, wow, this is my best work. And then you look later on in life and you're like, I could have done something a little bit better, but I'm trying to get out of the habit of that and just celebrating it for what it is and what it was, and just celebrating myself for the season that I was in during that time and not being so hard on myself.
Yes, definitely. And speaking of like seasons and stuff too, something that I did when I restarted, in 2020 with podcasting is that like for my interviews, I would actually record them in somewhat of groups of 12, meaning that for every 12 episodes, like I will update something, whether it's for me as a video podcast, whether it's like some of the graphics, or maybe I just change like the phrasing of some of my like introductory or ending phrases. And it's just those small things that also allow for me to best remember when I record with certain people, because I don't the mental fear I have is that as time goes on and I speak with more people, is that I'm going to start forgetting, like, okay, when was it that I spoke with this person? And so by doing it in these groups or these seasons, I'm able to remember, okay, this person was summer 2021, and that's because they were right before this person, right after that person. So I think I've done a pretty good job at remembering when I spoke with certain people and the conversations that we had. And it's funny whenever I re-listen to a previous discussion, like remembering where exactly like I edited this, or this person said this thing that just blew my mind. And so it's just, it's such a fun journey that I'm excited to continue forward with.
No, yeah, I totally agree. One thing about podcasting is you never stop learning, and that's universal dependent. Like, not even, it doesn't matter what genre you're in, what your podcast is about. It does not matter. You're always learning something, whether that's from your audience or the interviewer themselves. And I think that's something that's great, and that's what's beautiful about it. Especially, and I feel you on that rebranding part of when did this happen? When did my brain decide, oh my gosh, yes, let's change something? And then remember with the people that was there before, oh, right, you were before the change or you were after the change.
Yeah. I think that was something that I had, really worked to try to make sure that I could remember. And I know, like, for 2021, I had worked, as a personal goal, I had worked to make that the quote unquote the most productive year ever, which was probably the best and worst decision I have ever made. But nevertheless, I had so many amazing conversations during that year. But I remember ending out the year trying to remember, it's like, how many people did I speak with this year? Like, how many episodes have I done? And so I remember it's like, okay, you know what? Yeah, going forward, I'm going to do a better job of, like, I've always been in the moment with recording, but rather, remembering the moments and being able to highlight just the amazing discussions that we're having. Because to me, it's like, everyone that's been on the podcast, I want, obviously to make sure that those tuning in can hear their stories. But that also means that, that we as podcasters, we're also the producers of our show. We have to also make sure that we do our part and actually, like, edit it and release it on time and have the communication a part of it. Because otherwise, I mean, we're just taking the time of others. I'd hate to say any conversation is a waste of time. But, if we don't do the work for it, I mean, we're not getting everything that we originally said we were going to do.
And I think a big part of that is also just making sure that we're representing them well too, because I think that's one of my biggest things, is making sure that I'm representing these students and these professionals well, and making sure that I'm able to communicate their value as an outsider who's not living in their body, and making sure that I'm able to broadcast how valuable and how special these people are the best way that I can, whether that's through the audio communication of the podcast or any other forms of communication like social media and things like that. So I completely understand, and I want to ask from your from your experience, because I think this is something valuable. When people say, okay, hey Brandon, I want to start a podcast, what is your first piece of advice that you give?
I would say one of the first things that I would say, or something I'd emphasize the most, is if this is something that you decide to do, make sure that you communicate with your audience and that you know what you want to do. And I think it's always important, it's okay to not know like what you want to do in the future. I think that's okay. But I think it's important that whatever you do, that you communicate it with the audience. Because I'm not really a fan, for her, say, of, like, for instance, like, you find a creator you really enjoy and you follow them for their few weeks as they start their project, and then they disappear into oblivion forever. Is that, I mean, I feel like doing content is almost like you're having a friendship with the audience. And the last thing that I would want to do as a creator is to break that trust that we have. And so that's why, like, even, in this past almost, year and a half-ish, going on 2 years, of doing my current show, is that I wanted to make sure that if I said I'm putting out weekly episodes, that I am having weekly episodes. And if I can't, for whatever reason, that I'm communicating that with the audience. Because I want to make sure that, I can stick with what I'm going to say. And so I think it's perfectly fine if you're just trying it off as a 1 month experience. But make sure that you tell the audience that. And that if you're done with the project, it's not working out, let them know. They'll probably understand. And it's easier to understand that than it is to try to figure out why your favorite creator disappeared for 2 years.
That's really good advice. I think for me, when I first ideated the podcast versus when my actual first episode came out, there was definitely a 6-month difference. So
yeah. I know for me, I always say that, I've been podcasting since 2017, consistently since 2020. But, like I said before, I'm a very precise person. I oftentimes mention, the certain dates of things. Like, the first podcast went out was November 17th of 2017. Like, there's certain things like that I remember. But in terms of starting consistently doing it in 2020, it's like, I started off the year. I was like, new year, new decade. I'm going to start this off right, doing podcasts. And then, of course, the pandemic hit. And what was so interesting about that time was that, even though that many of us were at home and everything, is that many guests weren't available. And you may be wondering, it's like, well, they're at home. Like, where are everyone? But for so many, like if you're in college, you're still trying to figure out how to pass your classes in a learning style that may not fit for you. Or if you're, or if you have a family, whether as a, parent, sibling, child, whoever, is that you might have to look after your family more. And so obligations and everything shifted a little bit. So in that time, it was a lot harder to find guests, just because it was just such a different time than any of us were anticipating for the best year ever, 2020. And so I ended up taking a little, break from there. But by the time of August 2020, I was just like, okay, you know what? I said at the time I had planned to do once a month interviews. That's like, okay, well, once a month didn't work, but that would take me about to 12 interviews. If I can just do 12 interviews by the conclusion of 2020, even if it goes into 2021 a little bit, I think my goal was accomplished, and I'll stop right there. And sure enough, I'm still here 2024. So I think a part of, who I am is that I just want to have these conversations. And that's actually why I picked 12 as my number of how many episodes are in my seasons, is because I want 12 episodes of 2020. And, I kept going from there, weekly episodes. And so, yeah.
I love that. I think that's a great message, definitely for us to even leave off on, of just being consistent and make what is consistent your consistent. So your consistent is your consistent. It does not mean when people say stay consistent in this regard, that there's necessarily a way or a just straight way to do that. So be creatively consistent to what you have, what's around you, and what you have the capacity for.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for giving us all of this information and sharing your story with us, Brandon, of just everything from podcasting to production, but also just to how you're able to connect with people and how powerful communication is.
Thank you so much. And I just love what you are doing, like I said, with your amazing show, the Intentional Intern Podcast. And I think it's just such an amazing platform to meet with fellow students and professionals. And so I just wish you the absolute best. And I'm just so excited to continue following, like I said, your journey. And you are certainly, of course, welcome on my podcast whenever you'd like.
I really appreciate that. It's so nice to hear that everyone likes to be a part of just a bigger mission of uniting community, especially from podcaster to podcaster. So I appreciate you.
Of course, and likewise.
That's a wrap for today's episode of the Intentional Intern Podcast. We hope you're leaving with fresh insights and a boost of motivation to take on your career journey. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to follow, leave a review, and share it with your network. Connect with us on LinkedIn and Instagram and let us know your thoughts. Your feedback fuels our next great episode. Until next time, stay intentional, keep growing, and keep shining bright. See you in the next episode.